Hello, Paulisthebest3UK here and welcome to the 2021 Christmas special. In this video I'm going to be comparing 3 systems of 6 games: Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum and Amstrad CPC. Now on screen now you'll see the Commodore 64 version in the mini screen, ZX Spectrum version also in the mini screen in the middle there, and the Amstrad CPC version in the middle screen. But that's not how we're going to compare them. That's just an example of how I'm going to be comparing the games. They're going to be in a bigger screen. So let's have a look at it's going to always be in that order: Commodore 64, then ZX Spectrum and Amstrad CPC. So let's have a look at the Commodore 64 version of Monty on the Run. Now this is probably the best version of the 3. It's got an awesome soundtrack and yeah, excellent graphics, nice and colourful, nice and detailed. The game is rock solid on all 3 formats and not an easy game at all. I couldn't get very far, and this is the first comparison: Monty on the Run. This one was suggested by Matthew Holcroft on my Facebook account. Thank you very much for the suggestion. For this version, the ZX Spectrum version, I've returned the background music because there's actually hardly any sound at all on this version. There's no music whatsoever, apart from a tiny bit on the title screen, and there's only very rarely a sound effect. So yeah, a bit of a poor version of the game, but it is limited to the 48k with just a beeper, so maybe I can forgive it for that. It's a shame there wasn't a 128k version of the game, however, but I think the game was maybe created before the 128k was a thing. Anyway, so yeah, that's the I might be wrong on that, by the way. So that's the ZX Spectrum version of Monty on the Run. Not so good. Last but not least, definitely not least, this is the Amstrad CPC 464 version of Monty on the Run. Now this is a better effort than the Spectrum version because it's got music again. The Amstrad CPC did have additional memory, and it also had an AY sound chip, whereas the Spectrum 48 did not, so I can sort of forgive the Spectrum. But yep, this is the Amstrad CPC version. It's got the same tune but in AY style instead of SID style as the Commodore 64 version, and it's a valiant effort. I'm gonna have to say that my favourite one out of the 3 has to be the Commodore 64 version now. So yeah, here's the Amstrad CPC in all its glory. A suggestion from John Davis on Facebook. This is Android 2, game by Vortex Software. It's a sequel to the original Android, and here is the Commodore 64 version. Quite a nice game, was quite unique at the time in the early 80s, and yeah, here is the Commodore 64 version. Let's have a look. Time for the ZX Spectrum version of Android 2. the sequel to Android from Vortex Games 1984, and the Spectrum version has a different colour palette, but it's pretty much the same as the Commodore 64 version in every which way possible, considering the very different graphics chips. I have now removed the festive decorations at the background because the games look a bit out of place on that background, so it looks a bit better with just a black border, I like to think. And last but never least, here is the Amstrad CPC version of Android 2 by Vortex Software. And you can see it's got a bit of a menu at the start now, and read instructions, customise graphics, swap character set, so you can do a few more things on this version, so a bit more enhanced. So this is probably like the best one of the three because of the extra options. But this one I've noticed was released in 1985. I think the other two were released in 1984, weren't they? So maybe this one come out a lot later. Anyway, here is Android 2 on the Amstrad CPC. Back to Commodore 64, and here we have Cobra, the 1987 Ocean game. This is suggested by Baz Harding on Facebook. I think, well, I know he's also got a YouTube channel. Anyone's YouTube channels I'll put as a link in the description below, just in case you want to check them out. But yep, this is Cobra, the Commodore 64 version. Nice and colourful, smooth scrolling, and some SID music in the background. So here it is. Okay, so here is Cobra, the ZX Spectrum version. Now I think I've downloaded the same game for both systems, because this game is completely different than the Commodore 64 version we just seen. It has got a bit of parallax on it, but these missiles keep coming from nowhere, and yet you keep, when you just get destroyed, you turn into a massive explosion, so that's kind of strange. Quite nice graphics, but no music on this version. And yep, so here is the very different Cobra on the ZX Spectrum. Again, last but not least, here is the Amstrad CPC 464 version of Cobra. Now this game has more colourful graphics than the ZX Spectrum, but it's still a different game than the Commodore 64 version. and it's pretty different than the Spectrum version. So it seems like all three games are different to each other, to be honest. This one's got music, so this is one of you will find that more Amstrad CPC games have got music than Spectrum games. But yeah, this is the Amstrad CPC. Obviously the CPC 464 had music in a lot of games. It didn't require the 6128, where the Spectrum definitely required the 128K for most, or if not, well, actually all AY music games. But yeah, this is the Amstrad CPC version of Cobra. Different than the first two. They all seem to be three different games, by the looks of it to me. I hope I've downloaded the correct versions. Another suggestion by John Davis on Facebook is Trashman. Hey, so this is a wheelie bin, well, not a wheel, well, I suppose a bin simulator. So you have to, not a bin simulator, but you have to collect the bins like the waste recycling people do. And yeah, so this is Trashman, the Commodore 64 version, and yeah, excellent graphics and looks the part for the time. Very nice game and very fun and quite nostalgic. It's got quite a cult following in a couple of sequels. I think one of them was a Homebrew sequel as well. But yeah, this is Trashman on the Commodore 64. What a great suggestion. Next up is the ZX Spectrum version of Trashman. I'm not sure which version come out first, or if they all came out simultaneously. Now you'll notice on the Commodore 64 version that we've just seen, it has sort of like a blue theme to it. The Spectrum version, however, has a more of a yellow theme. Well, it's more the border in it, but it certainly changes the look of the game. Yep, but excellent graphics also on the Spectrum, nice and colourful, which you don't see that often on the Spectrum, unfortunately. And yeah, a great conversion on the ZX Spectrum. Last up is the Amstrad CPC version of Trashman, and yeah, it looks pretty much similar to the other two. Great conversion. I think I like the Spectrum colours a little better than the Amstrad CPC version, but other than that, it looks a pretty decent game on the Amstrad CPC. So all around, probably equally as good for this one, in my opinion, on all three systems. Here we have Iridium, I think that's how it's pronounced, by Housen. This is a suggestion by Chris Willock on Facebook. He also has a YouTube channel which I've linked below in the description below. He does a lot of Commodore 64 based videos, so he's going to like this version of the game the best, I reckon. But yet so do I. In fact, this is very fluid, very fast. You can tell how it uses the hardware sprites, and yep, this is a very smooth shooter. And I've already saw all 3 games, and yep, this is my preferred version. So I'm going to show the other 2, of course. And yep, so this is Iridium, great suggestion by Chris Willock. So thank you very much for that one. So, Iridium also come out on the ZX Spectrum, and here it is. The graphics aren't so smooth and fluid, but it's not a bad effort considering that the computer does not have any hardware sprites whatsoever, and they've used software alone to do it, and they've done a pretty decent job on this. Not quite as refined as the Commodore 64 version, but not a bad effort at all. Top marks for that one. Amstrad CPC 464 version now, and this one's got some music on the title screen, and it's also audio option screen or title screen, whatever you want to call it. It's a bit more colourful than the ZX Spectrum version, but it does feel a tad slower than the ZX Spectrum version. But it's still a valiant effort, it's still a good game. I don't think the Amstrad CPC has hardware sprites either, so the Commodore 64 has the advantage over these 2, I think, in this threesome of games. First up, the Commodore 64 version of Wubble Bobble. This was another suggestion from Baz Harding. Pretty decent conversion, good SID music and plays very well. Sound effects aren't bad either. Nice start. Now for the ZX Spectrum 128K version. Interestingly, the re-release of Wubble Bobble when it was on the budget label later didn't have the music even if you loaded it on a 128K, but the original full price version did, much better with the music. The ZX Spectrum has the capability of mixing 48K beep noise with the AY sound chip, so sound chips don't knock out a sound channel. 464 version is disappointing. No music. It still plays okay and looks okay. I couldn't tell you if the Amstrad 6128 version has music. However, there's been a more recent game from the Homebrew called Bubble Bobble for CPC, which is a lot better and reintroduces the music. Here it is in action. Here is a suggestion from Alan Davenport. Treasure Island Dizzy from Codemasters, or Dizzy 2. Great start, lovely colourful border around the screen which the other versions didn't have. This is the Oliver Twins classic game running on the C64. The C64 version has a unique sounding soundtrack using some of the techniques of the SID chip. Treasure Island Dizzy on the 128K ZX Spectrum, my favourite version of the game. Gone is the border from the C64 version, but that's because of screen resolution constraints. However, the game runs faster and fastest on this system out of all three. Amstrad CPC now. I think the Oliver Twins programmed the original Dizzy games on the CPC. The CPC version is like the Spectrum version but limited to a number of colours, and I'm not sure why they did. Add a bit of green to the egg. Doesn't look as good to me. It also runs slower than Spectrum. Andres Makanda, hopefully I've pronounced your name correctly, apologise if I haven't, suggested Werewolves of London, a game I've never played, looks good on the C64, nice music, good looking game. Spectrum version, no music but sharper looking graphics, however most of the graphics are the same colour, still plays pretty decently. the Amstrad CPC version of Werewolves of London, and this is like the Commodore 64, has colourful graphics and music. Not bad game on all three systems, thanks for the suggestion. Now for a homebrew game on each system. Now these are three games I've never played until making this video, and the first one is Bomberland. Now this comes as a cartridge form for the Commodore 64. You can either load it in voice or the D64 Mini or the C64 or your real C64 if you have an EEPROM burner. So it's a cartridge game and it's called Bomberland. Basically a port of Bomberman, or Dino Blaster as it was known in some territories, and yeah, this is absolutely superb for Commodore 64. It's got all the music and the presentation is incredible. Very good homebrew. I didn't give scores on the other games, but I'm going to give scores on these homebrews, and yeah, I'm going to have to say this is a definite 10 out of 10 from me. Absolutely superb. Onto the ZX Spectrum 128K now, and this is space racing. Now this is something of an achievement. By the way, you can find all the links to these homebrew games in the video description below if you want to try them out yourself on an emulator, or if you want to try them out on your real machine. But this is something else. This is an F-Zero clone, but they've used some sort of clever techniques to try and emulate Mode 7 but on a Spectrum, you know, the Mode 7 on a Super Nintendo, and yeah, they've done a really good job. I don't know how they've pulled it off. It does look a bit pixelated, but I'm sure you'll agree the results are very impressive. It's amazing what these homebrew community can do with these ancient machines. Very good racing game. This one's been out for a few years, but this is Pinball Dreams on the Amstrad CPC. Now, I never thought I'd see Pinball Dreams running on a 8-bit microcomputer, but here it is, and it runs really well. I'm sure you agree, if you've ever played the Amiga version, this is very impressive for the time. Well, it has been out for a few years, and for the time hardware, and they've managed to cram it onto an Amstrad CPC. I think the homebrew might need a memory expansion to get it to work. I'm not sure. You might have to let me know in the comments about that. But I'm using this Ape emulator, and yeah, it's just superb. I love the AY rendition of the music as well. Top class, and it's the first time I've ever played it. No, this is something else. This is a brand new homebrew game of Sonic the Hedgehog on the Commodore 64. It requires a RAM expansion module of 256k or more, but I'm sure you'll agree this is amazing. Based on the Sega Master System version, and it's remarkable they have this running on the system. Very impressed. See for yourself. The SID music is great also. Thank you for watching the 2021 Paulisthebest3UK Christmas special.